Welcome. Enjoy the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Opening Michaela's oven was the culmination of everything Eliza and I had worked for. Those early mornings felt different when you're working for yourself. There's a special kind of magic in unlocking your own bakery shop door at 4 a.m., firing up the ovens, and watching the first rays of sunrise filter through the front windows. I found my groove in the back, working the dough with practiced motions. The rhythmic push-pull of kneading became my meditation, something I'd perfected over countless hours in our tiny apartment kitchen. The feel of the dough transforming under my hands from shaggy mess to silky smooth never got old. Eliza turned our front counter into an art gallery of sorts. Her cakes drew crowds, each one more elaborate than the last. She had this way of piping butterflies that looked ready to take flight, and her sugar flowers put the real ones in our window boxes to shame. Customers would press their noses against the display case, phones out, snapping pictures of her latest creations. We fell into a natural rhythm together. While I handled the bread and morning pastries, she'd focus on special orders and customer service. The neighborhood regulars became part of our daily routine. Old Mrs. Chen from the bookstore next door would pop in for her daily sourdough. The kids from the elementary school 3 blocks over would stop by after classes, pressing sticky fingers against the glass case. Some days, we'd catch each other's eye across the kitchen and just grin, covered in flour and exhausted but happy. The scent of fresh bread and butter filling every corner of our little shop, the bell above the door chiming constantly with new customers. We even started having those playful flour fights, though I always made sure to clean up before the health inspector showed up. The business grew faster than we'd expected. Word spread about Eliza's custom cakes, and my sourdough gained a following of its own. Soon we had lines forming before opening, and our weekend special pastry boxes would sell out within hours. I had no idea that soon our little perfect world would come down, crashing and burning. The morning I first noticed Sweet Heat's grand opening sign, my stomach dropped. Through the pristine windows, I caught glimpses of their ultra-modern interior, all chrome, glass, and sharp angles, a far cry from our worn wooden counters and vintage display cases. Over the next few weeks, I watched our regulars drift toward Jim Hargrove's place. His perfectly styled hair and tailored suits made my flour-dusted apron feel suddenly outdated. The way he worked the room, chatting up customers with that practiced smile, you'd think he was running for office instead of selling pastries. Our sales numbers told the story. Each day, I noticed fewer familiar faces coming through our door. The morning rush slowed to a trickle. Even Mrs. Peterson, who'd been buying our sourdough every Sunday for 5 years, started carrying Sweet Heat bags past our window. Through the grapevine, I heard about their deconstructed croissants and fusion flavors, everything designed for social media, with geometric patterns and edible gold leaf. It was all flash and trends, while we stuck to recipes passed down through generations. One particularly quiet evening, as Eliza and I counted the day's receipts, the numbers hit harder than usual. We were down almost 30% from the same time last year. I looked at our empty tables, then at Eliza's worried expression as she studied the books. "We can't let him outbake us," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The determination must have shone in my eyes, because Eliza's face immediately brightened. She nodded, already reaching for her recipe notebook. That night, we stayed late planning. Our little bakery might not have Sweet Heat's sleek appeal, but we had something Jim Hargrove couldn't buy. Decades of experience and traditional techniques that made our pastry special. We were in it together, or so I thought at the time. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as my mind raced with new recipe ideas. By dawn, I was already in our kitchen, experimenting with a sourdough variation that incorporated local honey. The aroma of fresh bread filled our small bakery, as Eliza burst through the door, her auburn hair wild from the morning wind. The next few weeks became a blur of flour clouds and sugar rushes. We rolled out new specials daily, my artisanal bread paired with Eliza's creative pastries. Our maple bacon morning buns drew crowds before sunrise, and her lavender-infused croissants had people lining up around the block. Jim wasn't taking it lying down. His flashy Midnight Madness events featured half-price pastries after 10 p.m., complete with a DJ and strobe lights. It was so unlike our quiet, homey space that I almost laughed until I noticed our evening crowd thinning out. That morning, seeing his flyer on our door made my blood boil. The paper crumpled satisfyingly in my fist. But Eliza's reaction caught me off guard. Her laugh didn't match her eyes. There was something weird going on there. The familiar scent of vanilla and butter that usually calmed my nerves now felt heavy in the air. I threw the flyer in the trash can. This was a declaration of war for me, and I had no idea that Jim already started his war against me in a way I never in a million years expected. That afternoon, my usual workout just didn't hit right, and my stomach churned in ways I couldn't ignore. Figured I'd cut it short, head home, maybe down some ginger tea, and call it a write-off. The walk back was quiet enough, crisp air biting at my skin, but when I rounded the corner to Michaela's oven, my steps slowed. The sign in the window read, "Closed." That slapped me sideways. Lunchtime rush, and we weren't open? That wasn't just unusual. It was wrong. The bakery was more than a business. It was a rhythm, a constant hum of life that rarely missed a beat. Even slow days had this steady pulse of regulars, grabbing their favorites, tourists pretending they'd stumbled on a secret gem, and me, or whoever up front, keeping the register moving. Closing at peak hours, that wasn't in the playbook. I stopped at the door, scanning through the glass. Inside was still, except for this faint trail of giggling drifting out. My brow furrowed as I leaned closer. Laughter? Hard to tell where it was coming from, muffled and broken up by walls, but in my shop? Something about it jabbed at me. A wrong step in what should have been a well-tuned dance. I opened the door with my own key and stepped in. The air in the back room felt off, heavy like over-kneaded dough. Eliza stood there, caught mid-mation, her hands still ghosting over the counter like she wasn't sure what to do with them. Her apron was in its usual chaotic state, a mess of smudges and streaks, and her clothes looked hastily put on, but that didn't bother me. The startled look in her eyes did. She never got flustered, not even during the morning rush when customers lined up out the door for coffee and croissants. Seeing her rattled stirred something in my gut. I stepped farther in, scanning the room. The counter next to her was dusted with a thick layer of flour, except for those handprints. Broad, unmistakably masculine, and high next to it, an imprint of something that can only be described as two sizable orbs closed together. Like someone has sat on that flour with their naked bottom. Eliza noticed where I was looking, and hastily swept over the flour with her hand. The edges of my smile twitched before I forced it back into place. What the hell is going on here? I glanced toward the back door. A faint trail of flour was smudged across the wood just below the handle, like someone, in a rush, had grabbed it with dusty hands. The low hum of the refrigerator filled the silence between us, but the tension was louder. She was avoiding my eyes, busying herself with wiping down the counter, scrubbing away whatever evidence lingered. New recipe! I didn't mean for it to sound as skeptical as it did. I shifted my weight, my boots scuffing against the tiled floor. Her movements stilled for a fraction of a second, and then she nodded. Too firmly, like she was confirming it for herself just as much as for me. Yeah, just something I wanted to perfect before we tried it up front. She turned just enough to dump the cloth into the sink, her back now to me. The words hung in the air, thin as icing sugar, and about as convincing. Her hair was coming loose from its bun, strands of auburn clinging to the nape of her neck. She usually had everything about herself so put together, even in the chaos of the bakery. I stared at the back of her head, at the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly under her blouse. My fingers flexed at my sides, itching to press, to ask, but I didn't. The oven timer went off sharply, breaking what little eye contact I'd managed to hold. She leapt on the excuse, whipping toward it like her life depended on saving whatever was inside. Later that evening, I wiped down the last counter, my movements mechanical as my mind churned over the afternoon's events. The bakery stood silent except for the hum of the refrigerators, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in my gut. Eliza already went to the bedroom to rest, apparently having a headache after such a long and hard day. I tossed the cleaning cloth in the sink and headed to the small office upstairs. The security system wasn't fancy, just a basic setup we'd installed after Jim opened his place across the street. I clicked through the menu to access today's footage. Nothing. The entire afternoon block was gone, just empty space where 4 hours of video should have been. My hands went cold. The footage could only be deleted manually, using the admin password. Only Eliza and I had that password. I sat there in the dark office, staring at the blank screen. Eliza never touched the security system. She'd always said technology wasn't her thing. She'd even made fun of me when I installed it, calling me paranoid. Well, I guess I had a reason to be paranoid, huh? I went into settings and scrolled through until I found what I needed: cloud setup. After a couple minutes, everything was ready. I set it up for the footage to be uploaded directly to my phone, other than being saved on the computer. I doubted Eliza would notice those changes. At least not until I finally see what she was hiding. I shut down the computer and walked back into the bakery to lock it for the night. A week later, I sat in my parked car, heart pounding and sweat still cooling on my skin from the workout, as I scrolled through the bakery's security footage on my phone. The familiar sight of our kitchen's white walls and steel counters filled the screen. My finger froze mid-swipe. There they were! Eliza and Jim in our back room. My stomach twisted as I watched them stumble against the prep table. Her fingers tangled in his perfectly styled hair while he pressed her against the stainless steel. Their moans echoed through my phone speakers, transforming into sounds that made me want to hurl my phone through the windshield. I clicked off the video, my hands shaking. The steering wheel creaked under my white-knuckled grip. Jim fucking Hargrove. The same guy who'd been trying to put us out of business for months. And they did it as soon as I was off to the gym, the only time they knew I'd be away for a couple hours. I started my car, forcing myself to breathe steady, to think. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and strategic planning. Eliza didn't know I knew. That's how it would stay, for now. My mind raced through possibilities as I pulled into our driveway. Years of building our business together, our marriage, our life, and she threw it away. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of an explosion. No, this required a more calculated approach. I grabbed my gym bag and headed inside, already mapping out my next moves. For the first time since opening our bakery, I was grateful for all those business strategy books Eliza had insisted I read. I'd need every trick in them now. When I was leaving the house the next day, I made sure the gym bag in my hand looked convincingly packed. Eliza didn't glance up from the baking tray. The air smelled of caramel and almonds. It almost masked the sour knot of tension I'd been lugging around since this whole thing started. I didn't slam the door, just eased it shut and waited in the side alley until I heard the faint tinkling of the front bell. Felt like hours passed before I peeked through the tiny sliver of the bakery's back window, but my timing was spot on. There they were, Eliza and Jim, talking for a while before heading to the back room. I hurried to the front door, fishing out my key. Slowly and quietly, I unlocked it and left it slightly ajar after flipping the sign from closed to open. Just as quietly, I stepped back and checked the time on my phone. Any minute now. Earlier this day, I reached out to Jim's wife, Megan, a kind but no-nonsense woman I'd previously chatted with at community events. "You might want to stop by our bakery around noon," I told her vaguely. She hesitated but agreed, curiosity and suspicion etched on her face. And now she was just about to show up. She was a very punctual woman. The faint sound of car doors in the lot snapped me out of whatever was hammering through my head. Megan's clipped footsteps echoed in the alleyway. She had no idea what she was about to walk into. The shout that followed was raw, bursting out with an anger so fierce it could strip paint off the walls. I froze as her words echoed through the hallway and out into the street. What the hell is this? I rushed in, realizing that I didn't want to miss the scene. As I rounded the corner, Megan stood in the center of the room, her spine rigid and her shoulders squared like a drawn bowstring. But her face, God, her face was twisted with something beyond fury. Her hands trembled at her sides. Eliza stood just out of reach, her apron pulled down, stained and wrinkled, her palms covering her naked chest, looking like someone had hit her with a spotlight. Her eyes darted everywhere like they were searching for an escape route, lips parting and then clamping shut as if she was trying to piece together some plausible explanation, one that wasn't coming fast enough. And Jim? Well, Jim's hands were still hovering awkwardly in the air, right after he had pulled his pants up. I noticed he forgot to zip them up. His face mirrored an odd concoction of adrenaline and guilt, like he'd been caught red-handed sneaking out of a bank vault. Eliza's voice cracked when she managed to speak. "Megan, it's not what it looks like." Megan's laugh was guttural, sharp-edged and humorless, and for a moment I thought she might just break into a sob. Instead, her hand shot out, grabbed the nearest thing off the steel countertop. Mag. A bag of flour, without hesitation, and hurled it at Jim with all her might. The force wasn't what stopped him. It was the explosion of white powder, a violent cloud swallowing everything within a few feet. Jim sputtered, waving his hands uselessly to clear the air. Specks of flour clung to his suit, his jaw hanging open. Eliza screamed, and I couldn't help but let out a laugh. It was chaos. Curious passers-by outside began to gather, their faces pressed against the glass as they peered in to see what the commotion was about. I could see their silhouettes shifting, some whispering to one another, while others pointed in bemusement at the spectacle unfolding within. The sudden crowd only amplified the chaos, turning our small kitchen into an impromptu stage for the drama that had just erupted. Megan's voice sliced through it all like a cleaver, sharp, loud, and unrelenting. Jim stumbled behind her, his tailored suit now comically smeared with streaks of white powder. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mr. Polished, reduced to a walking mess. Megan's grip on his arm didn't waver, her blue eyes blazing with fury. Jim didn't even bother trying to say anything, his jaw set in some twisted version of damage control mode. He brushed at his chest pointlessly, sending a puff of flour into the air. Most of it just stuck to the sweat already beading at his temples. Megan didn't let up, dragging him out the door with all the subtlety of a battering ram. People let them through, some choked, some laughing at the scene. Eliza stood frozen behind the counter, eyes darting between them and me like a cornered rabbit. For once, the confident, sharp-tongued Eliza McKellar didn't have the words. Not that she had a chance to use them. I stepped forward, leaning on the edge of a display case. Looks like you've been caught with your hands in someone else's dough." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Just empty air, a ghost of an excuse she hadn't even finished forming yet. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her apron, streaking her fingers with drying icing. She blinked, starting to speak again, but I didn't wait. I straightened, brushing past a chair that wobbled precariously after Megan had knocked into it earlier. Every step toward the door felt slower, like my boots were sinking into the dusting of flour covering the floor. Behind me, I swear I could hear the faint rattle of Eliza's breath, like a balloon deflating, but refusing to collapse entirely. She had finally hurried to dress herself. The door creaked open under my hand. People stepped out of my way. I didn't look back. The fallout felt like stepping into the middle of a storm you didn't see coming. By the time I'd showed up at the bakery again to pack my bags and slammed the door behind me for the second time, half the neighborhood already seemed to know. I headed to my brother's place, beating on his door until he answered in his ratty robe. He didn't need to ask any questions. I guess whatever flush of rage or betrayal painted my face made it clear enough why I showed up unannounced. He didn't press, just pulled the door open wider and waved me in, offering the spare bedroom like it was a life raft in an open sea. I heard through our neighbor that Jim was desperate to fix things, and Megan, tougher than nails and twice as proud, wasn't letting him off easy. Couldn't blame her. By the time the weekend rolled around, I've already visited my lawyer. I knew divorce takes time, and I didn't want to waste another day being married to a cheating liar. The news about Megan and Jim's attempted reconciliation reached me through mutual friends. Megan had always been sharp. Making Jim choose between her and Eliza was exactly the kind of ultimatum he needed. Of course, he jumped at the chance, and any connection he previously had to Eliza was severed for good. I focused on my brand new food truck instead. The initial investment cleaned out my savings, but it proved worth every penny. There was something liberating about working from a mobile kitchen. No rent, no overhead, just me and my ovens, creating what I loved. The morning prep became my meditation, mixing dough in the pre-dawn hours, letting the scent of fresh bread fill the small space. Word spread fast in our town. My regular spots outside the local coffee shop and near the park drew growing crowds. Many were familiar faces, former McKellar's customers who'd followed me. They'd share neighborhood gossip while waiting for their orders, including updates about Eliza's struggling after the divorce. After the bakery closed, Eliza moved out of the apartment above it, taking only what her sedan could carry. I heard snippets here and there, through mutual friends mostly, that she tried landing work at a few upscale bakeries in the city, but nothing stuck. Her name didn't carry much weight. A couple of months later, word got back to me that she was renting a studio in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of town. I didn't take pleasure in having to see McKellar's bakery close for good, but I couldn't deny feeling a weight lift from my shoulders with each passing day. Operating solo meant every decision was mine. No more compromising on quality, no more flashy gimmicks to appease someone else's vision. Just honest, well-crafted bread and pastries. The bakery that had been both my dream and later my prison was gone, but I'd found something better. Freedom, peace, and the simple joy of doing what I loved, my way. The rolling dough became more than just a business. It became my fresh start. The open road, the changing scenery, the satisfied smiles of customers, it all contributed to mending scars I hadn't even noticed were still tender. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed the story, remember to like, subscribe, and comment on the video for more stories like this. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have any similar stories to share, leave them in the comments and we'll make sure to bring them to life. Thanks for watching.